I want to talk to you about engineering. Um, you were on Lex's pod recently, and you sort of said that civilization gets a B plus in engineering, and the philosophies or the economics sort of area gets a D minus. You know, largely because we've made progress, and we've had a bit of a wash in that realm. Uh, but I guess I wanted to ask one nuanced piece about that is technology or engineering seems to be far more progressive in nature, like as in we build on top of it, whereas philosophies or principles or economics seem to be or morality, for example, seems to be more principled in nature. It's not something that once you've figured out like a methodology for living, or a philosophy of morality, for example, it kind of stays the same, right? It's not like engineering, which you sort of continue to build on top of. Um, so I guess first is, do you have a thought on that? And then next, I want to ask you about engineering for complexity, because I've got a little bit of a digression on that.
Well, I think that to the extent we depoliticize things, we make progress. The decision to use steel instead of wood in a house um, is not so much political. And when you build a steel building, it's demonstrably better.
Hmm.
So the fact that you can demonstrate virtue in an apolitical way is what causes science and technology to advance. It's not always right. If you have a theocracy where you can't, right? Like look what they did to Galileo, right?
Hmm.
Um,
I mean,
if
also
you ha-
Russia and Stalin, right? Same thing.
yeah, if you have a culture that doesn't let you do that in a political way, then you don't advance so fast. But generally, the advantage of engineering disciplines is I can build. If I build a bad plane, it crashes and burns, and it's obvious. And if I build a good plane and you get in it and you fly, it's obvious. Same with ships, same with railroads, same with a lot of things. Same with guns, right? I mean, you pull the trigger, it blows up in your face, right? You know, it doesn't matter whether you have this political view or that political view. You prefer the gun that works the way you wanted it to work. And so those things tend to be very virtue driven and they're very Darwinian too, right?
Hmm.
Whereas if you look at the fields of economics and philosophy, we're still debating the right form of government for 2,500 years,
Hmm.
right? Democracy versus monarchy versus autocracy, oligarchy versus whatever it is. There's still a debate. We haven't resolved that debate really. So I think that those are harder. Uh, Obviously, my philosophy is if you want to better the human condition, you're better off to invest in technical solutions than political solutions.
Hmm. Totally agree.
And that's why I say Bitcoin as digital energy is a technical solution, non-controversial, the successor to electricity. Bitcoin as a digital currency is a political solution, highly controversial, revolutionary. One is revolutionary and the other is evolutionary. One of them is political, the other one is technical. One of them, invites engineering professors to consider whether this is sound or not. The other invites economic professors. And so you can see like in winning the battle of the hearts and the minds, are you more likely to convince an engineer that Bitcoin is good or convince an economist that Bitcoin is good?
I guess it depends the kind of economist, right? Maybe the modern politically influenced economist will be a little bit tougher because they want
It's
to.
been hard though, right?
Yeah.
The majority of economists aren't even in favor of they're not even in favor of a non-inflationary currency.
Hmm.
So so my view is we're better off to focus on the technology than the politics or than the economics. But if we must get involved in economics, we're better off to focus upon just asset allocation of assets rather than focus upon currency replacements. Currency is always going to be political, right? And the next logical fight is the Argentines fighting with the Americans over whether or not Argentinian citizens can hold U.S. dollars. And if it's going to be a debate, let the Argentine government fight with the U.S. government over that, right? I mean, the United States is not likely to have all their citizens jailed while they debate with the Argentine State Department over the dollar problem in Argentina, right?
Hmm.
But you don't want to, as a Bitcoiner, go down to Argentina and have that same fight. You know, you're going to end up in a cage.
Coming back to the engineering thing. So I wrote a piece a little while ago that looked at. I was taking some of Jordan Peterson's work, and his chapter 2 in his 12 Rules for Life kind of takes the reader on a journey about this idea of chaos and order, and he talks about matter and what matters. And I guess the study of matter could be described as more engineering esque. It's more empirical in nature, and particularly over the last 500 years, there's been a great skew in civilization towards the advancement in the study of matter, right? And things like religion or philosophy or economics, etc., that kind of sits more in the realm of what matters, and that's a study of how to live, etc. Now, I grappled with this idea of we've seen so much technological or engineering type progress that we maybe in some sense what we've done is we've tried to take all of the studies of what matters, so the more philosophical natured things, and tried to place them in an empirical box and use engineering type modalities to kind of fix them. And this sort of where what I'm getting to here is like the idea of central planning an entire economy, or complex systems being able to be distilled into these simple models. And if only the variables within the model, so like these human beings should just be variables, and if we can fit them in the box, then everything will be perfect, and we have these utopian ideals of how society should be run. So I guess I wonder whether we can fix, quote unquote, fix things purely through an empirical lens, as engineers, or can we kind of get ourselves stuck there? And I mean, the end of my essay was basically this idea that Bitcoin kind of fuses the worlds of matter and what matters, because Bitcoin is transcends just being a technological idea. Like it transcends engineering. It's temporal, social, cultural, and in some sense even it's got a religious element to it. But I wonder what your thoughts are there on those two worlds, because they are both important. If we skew too far towards the empirical, then you kind of sanitize the life out of civilization, in a sense.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. You're getting very philosophical on me. I guess what I have to say about Bitcoin is Bitcoin represents, it is matter and energy in cyberspace.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big idea we ought to focus on. And we ought to be sending that message to all engineers everywhere that without Bitcoin, you don't have matter or energy in cyberspace, and everything that exists in the internet domain and the digital domain is merely a simulation or a model of something in
Mm-hmm.
the real world. The significance of being able to transfer something of value without an intermediary means that if I can transfer it to you without an intermediary, I can instantiate it, or I can manifest it without an intermediary. And that means it stands alone in cyberspace rather than being an image of something that is in the real world. The image in the real world makes it a security, uh, whereas when you actually manifest the actual unit, the Satoshi, in the digital realm, it is matter. I can create something of substance uh, in the digital realm using Bitcoin. And if that's the case, then that introduces the field of engineering and physics into cyberspace. And that's what's been missing in the entire digital realm. The digital realm for the past 30 years lacked matter and energy, and you just had simulations. And that meant that computer science might have been relevant, but all the other sciences were never relevant. Like all of the learnings in mechanical engineering and civil engineering and thermodynamics and physics and material science and aeronautical engineering, all of those insights, they're not relevant if there's no matter and no energy in
Mm-hmm.
the digital realm. So I think that what makes Bitcoin magical is that for the first time we introduce this concept of I mean, someone on Twitter the other day was talking about irreversible transactions. They said, why was Satoshi so fascinated by irreversible transactions? And they approached it from a very, I think, a narrow point of view. The idea like, well, we can't have irreversible transactions because that allows, we can't fix money laundering and we can't censor, and how do we get control of the system? But my thought was, yeah, Satoshi wanted irreversible transactions, but the idea for irreversible transactions came from the great Almighty when the universe
Yes.
was created,
Yes.
right? Because you know, in the beginning, let there be light, right? In the beginning, there was nothing, and then there was light. Well, light is energy. So the first thing that happens is energy, and then and matter is energy, and time flows in the beginning, right? Before time, there was nothing.
Yeah, maybe it was all a simulation at that point. Yeah.
And so what happens? Well, when you actually introduce the concept of irreversibility, you introduce entropy
Mm-hmm.
and time, right? The progression of time is the progression of disorder, and they're inextricably intertwined. And matter and energy are inextricably intertwined. And Bitcoin is like that Big Bang.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Big Bang, in the beginning, right, there was nothing. And then all of a sudden, the time chain starts to form, and there's irreversibility. And now there's the passage of time. And now there's electricity run through the SHA-256 protocol to become digitized energy, a digital asset. And the beauty of the protocol was it was introduced as a conservative protocol, not an open-ended protocol, right? One that the universe has a bound of 21 million.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because we had that, we had for the first time this sort of bearer instrument that represents energy that's conservative. And if I can transfer it to myself, to yourself, without an intermediary, then I can instantiate it. And if I can instantiate it, I can persist it. The ability to persist energy without an intermediary is what allowed us to cut the cord with the banks. Now the money flowing over the internet wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a shadow of the money in the Visa network. It wasn't a shadow of the money in a bank, right? To paraphrase, Plato's, shadows in the cave
Mm-hmm.
parable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, are you looking at shadows, or are you looking at the real thing?
Yeah.
Everything was shadows of the real thing until Satoshi. And now we actually have the real thing, also known as reified information. But reified, just a fancy word for objective, an object, right? A materialization, materialized information. So you could say it's materialized information, or you could say it was dematerialized energy, which is the opposite way to say the same thing. So if you're focused upon matter, and matter is relevant because matter is conservative, then the most extraordinary thing is the creation of matter in cyberspace. Because now I can construct $1 billion structure in cyberspace apart from any institution or individual, right? You could literally release the thing in cyberspace and it can live on its own. You could, in theory, create some kind of program, an AI program that was wealthy, that could live forever with assets or with wealth that is completely separate from any physical counterparty,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that that has all sorts of implications for efficiency through time and space and persistence
Yeah, there's
and
a
engineering.
specifically what you said about the forward movement of time. I think when that dawned on me a number of years ago, and I've kind of written about this before, and I've often said that Bitcoin's greatest impact on human civilization is the reintroduction of consequence, and I think these two things interplay with each other here. Is that the fact that Bitcoin makes matter in cyberspace, to use your words, kind of when you're in a simulation and there's no consequence and you can just behave the way you want, you create these sort of deviations. It doesn't function like real life anymore. But when you reintroduce a consequence, then you need to think twice about what you're doing. And it is like the forward motion of time in reality, because if I go tomorrow and jump off a cliff and I die, there's no rewind button. I can't fix that. And it's the same way as if I
Yeah,
send some Bitcoin to the wrong address, there's no reversibility. So it's like a mapping. The map actually fits the territory for the first time in civilization's history, and that consequence piece for me is really interesting, because then it links back to a healthier study of what matters. When we said before, like the study of what matter is, like, you've had all these things like religion and philosophy, etc. They've been an attempt to try and grapple with how one must behave when contended with the consequence of actions in the real world. And because we've kind of built all these fantasy models when it comes to whether politics or economics or all this other shit that's going on in the world today, everything's kind of like playing pretend. Like I saw on the news this morning, I was at the gym and I saw President Biden tells the states to lower the price of gas. It's like you can't just pretend your way into like fixing a problem. And this is, Bitcoin kind of removes that ability to pretend, and by reintroducing consequence, it like, I don't know, it fixes that dynamic between matter and what matters.
yeah. We're skeptical of central planning for obvious reasons, and things that work well because they're beyond the domain of politics.
Mm-hmm.
So, economics, philosophy, politics, all these things are political in nature, and that means that central planners and politicians can intervene and will intervene. And generally, the interventions are all well meaning and ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
And the more interventions they have, the more pain caused. And the best cases are just well meaning and effective and economically crippling. And the worst cases, they're well meaning and effectively and devastating. They create war and destruction and topple the entire civilization, right? So, things that are beautiful are things in nature that are beyond the reach of politics.
Mm-hmm.
So, a politician can't stop the force of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Like all these people say, why would I ever want to have an irreversible transaction? Well, like when you drop a rock off a cliff, it's irreversible transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want to have it? Well, because every machine works based upon those principles, right? If I want to build a dam, I need to know that the water always flows downhill and that no politician is going to cause the water to flow uphill randomly, per code, because it breaks the dam. Internal combustion engines work on principles, hot air expands, pistons fire, you know, centrifugal forces at work. So you can't build a mechanism without energy and matter and natural law and no political intervention. And that means if there is no matter in cyberspace, then nothing you do in cyberspace matters.
Yeah.
And that's why you get 180 million fake accounts on Twitter every year, because nothing matters. And that's why you get all the garbage and the spam and the phishing attacks and the toxicity, because nothing matters. And when things start to matter, there are consequences. And when there are consequences, um, you know, there's nothing unhealthy in nature, because nature recycles every unhealthy thing very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I had a goose on my property the other day, and it broke a leg, a gosling, a small goose, and there's like 50 other geese too, so I have a lot of geese. But this one broke a leg, and we tried to save it by putting it in a pond, and it lasted one day, and the next day I got up and I just saw a bunch of goose feathers all around the garden. No goose.
Oh well.
It's like, right, either the fox got it or an owl got it, and there's nothing to be done about it. You're not going to see anything that isn't healthy in nature. No lawyers, no courts, right? No appeal. And you can't, you can't create a mechanism without matter and energy. And so if I what's the difference, right? Well, if the transaction is reversible, then I can transfer the money every 2 months, and the money velocity is 6 times per year. If the transaction is not reverse or is irreversible, I can move it every hour, right? Thousands of times a year on the base layer, but I could move it every second on Lightning, or I can put it on a layer 3 and tweak it a bit, and I can move it 1,000 times a second. So what's the difference between reversible or political and irreversible, right? And I got to say, like today, I picked up the phone and I approved a wire transfer from a bank to another bank. Okay, well, I could do 10 transactions per week on the phone. That's the 20th century way, using people and reversible transactions. And the velocity when you go to irreversible and matter and energy is going to go to a kilohertz or 10 kilohertz or 1,000 kilohertz. And so it's not like 10x better or 100x better or 1,000x better. It's like try singing a
paradigm. Yeah, exactly.
Try singing a song by like tapping your foot on a rock as fast as you can. Yeah, and you say you can't. Beethoven's symphonies are not going to come, due to one guy hitting himself over the head with a rock. And that's what we're trying to do right now, Aleks, right? Everything we built in cyberspace, right? They're shadows of reality. And as much as we tell ourselves we built something functional, it's what is it? It's like it's a grotesque monstrosity of something functional.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can spin up 500,000 accounts a day on Twitter. Haha, they're all fake. You can place 1,000 comments a minute on Twitter. They're all toxic garbage, fake. right? They're fake because there's no consequences, there's no matter, there's no energy. So we create things that have the appearance of functionality, but they're not truly beautiful and they're not functional. And if we actually take this to the next extreme, consider all the buildings in the world constructed with steel. Now take away all the steel and consider what the world looks like. Now consider all the structures in cyberspace built without Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing beautiful. Everything twisted and perverted in some way, shape, or form. Now imagine we introduce a crypto steel, this thing we call Bitcoin, we run machines in cyberspace on digital energy, and we build walls and buildings and structures and fortresses in cyberspace with digital matter. And now, for the first time, there are consequences, and things do matter. And what beautiful machines will we make? And what kind of toxic garbage will we purge
Mm-hmm.
from the system?
It,
You start just by giving everybody on Twitter an orange check and get rid of all the bots, get rid of all the fake accounts, just get rid of everything, get rid of all the scammers. I think all the scammers on YouTube, I think, as far as I can see, there have been 25,000 Michael Saylor Bitcoin giveaway scams launched in the past 6 months. 25,000.
it's
Okay, so
insane.
what's the cost of that? I spend $1 million a year trying to fight that. Me, $1 million a year, like with people like with these kind of headaches, and the world's full of that kind of stuff. And the problem is we just don't have the right materials working in the digital realm.
Well,
So when I
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it reminds me of two things. One is an analogy that I used in a recent article called the blind man analogy. I say that the way society seems to operate today is like a blind man attempting to build a house with an elastic tape measure. And Bitcoin kind of gives us a tape measure and actually gives us sight. So the level of difference in the two kind of structures could be described by that kind of analogy. Is like a sighted person with an actual tape measure versus a blind person with an elastic tape measure. But I wanted to just park that analogy. The interesting thing about fixing matter in the digital realm is that you introduce cost, you introduce consequence. It actually, I would argue that a lot of the so-called innovation, and this is something that I think Peter Thiel would probably echo, is that we've seen so-called software eat the world, but do it in a strange sort of way where, as you said, like we've got all these perverted innovations. Like we don't need another, you know, dick pic app full of bots and God knows what else is in there. Like we've got actual problems in the realm of atoms, not of bits, that need to be solved. But there is a skew to go towards innovation in bits and bytes and dematerialization, all this sort of stuff, because it's all made up, it's all fantasy. There's no economic cost, there's no consequence. So it's just like this weird self-reinforcing game where I think most of the innovation, all of the brains, all of the engineering power that the world has seems to have gone into financial engineering and mindless software engineering, and all of the meaningful problems are not being solved because there's been this lack of anchor in the digital realm back to the physical realm. And I think that is an underappreciated element of what I think Bitcoin fixes in the world to a large degree. And I don't know what that means long term. Maybe quality over quantity, maybe pushing the world towards, solving so-called problems that have been too quote unquote expensive to solve, or the opportunity cost being too expensive because it's easier to just build another random software product that doesn't actually solve a problem but makes some VCs some money.
I think the real interesting, innovative work is to be done on top of Bitcoin, either developing, expanding new Lightning libraries and harnessing the Lightning protocol, or building applications using various parts of the Lightning protocol, or improving it, or building on layer threes and just building proprietary centralized applications that have Bitcoin embedded in them. And I think that there's been an underinvestment in that, and there's been an overinvestment in creating new base layer chains. Way too much focus on proof of stake networks and like 19,800 coins, and I look at all of it, and I'm hard pressed to see, but just endless recursive financial engineering
Yeah.
without solving the fundamental problems. Whereas the fundamental problems that are interesting are things like if you can stream sats, then why couldn't I actually spin up a spaces where anybody that shows up that meets a certain credential filter gets 100 sats a second or 1,000 sats a second, and then I'd literally be shining sunshine on you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if I stream sats by the second or by the millisecond, it's literally like shining sunshine. Sunshine is light, sats are energy, like quanta of energy. And if you did that, then you could turn into a marketing application. And I think people are starting to think about this, like marketing apps where you listen to earn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would I do that? Well, if you're a PhD cardiologist and I want to attract a bunch of PhD cardiologists, and maybe I would set up something where they get paid some money to come and join my space to help me solve a problem. And so that would be a marketing application, and every marketing person in the world could create these systems that radiate money, radiate energy. And you can flip it the other way, which is I'm going to suck the energy out of you. If you want to enter my space, you're going to have to pay 100 sats a second or 1,000 sats a second, right? And that's another form of friction. And then you can create lightning walls, or like a firewall where you have to pledge 100,000 or 10,000 sats to enter across the wall, and you may forfeit it. Like, what it's like if you enter a burning building. If you go to a burning building in the real world, you would walk in and then it's going to get hot. And then at some point you're going to start to burn. And then eventually you'll be dead. Right? That's consequence, a burning building. Can you create a burning building in cyberspace? You can create sunshine in cyberspace, or you can create a fire in cyberspace. You can create a heat sink. You can create a wall. You can rip down the wall. Mm-hmm. You can create any number of structures, and you can implement the structures with a frequency that's machine speed. So you could create very intricate mechanisms that might run 1,000,000 times faster than a physical mechanism, that have friction and consequence, and they exchange kinetic energy and potential energy. And you can use those things to clean up all the social media platforms. You can use them to solve enterprise cybersecurity issues. You can use them to revolutionize marketing. You can revolutionize sales. You can change the nature of products and services. People just need to think differently. What if I could put enough electricity in a Tesla to drive it for 10 years? What if I invented a fusion reactor and I put a sugar cube in the reactor and that operated the car for a decade? Well, that would be kind of interesting, an everlasting, immortal car that draws energy from a reactor. Well, so what if I could do it with electricity? Well, I can't, because the battery would have to be 10,000 times better. Well, what if I did it with a Bitcoin? What if I put $50,000 worth of Bitcoin into the car, in the chip? And then what if the Bitcoin ran through a exchange, and then it ran through a electric power provider, and the car was just continually replenished off of the Bitcoin for the life of the car? I could build a power source into the car? What if I built it into anything? What if I built it into the house? Like it's the conventional way to think about this is I gave you something with an endowment to pay for its perpetual
Mm.
upkeep,
Mm.
like a perpetual annuity. Well, what if I create a perpetual annuity, but I do it with Bitcoin, and then I attach it to a piece of hardware? You could attach it to a hardware wallet, right? I mean, like you could attach it to a program. You could then, if you then start to go back to this issue of frequency and vibration, and you create products that interplay with each other, you can create all sorts of interesting, new, fascinating products that might have marketing impact. They might have a product value. They might be a product in themselves. Might be a differentiator. Might have a security value. All of that stuff is layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5 innovation, and that market is really embryonic. Now, a little bit's being done there, right? I mean, some of the Lightning entrepreneurs, but I would say we're year 2 of Lightning and of that ecosystem. And the Lightning protocol is going to evolve and improve. It needs to. And then there are a lot of things you don't even need that. You could do it in a layer 3 proprietary protocol. But these are the breakthrough ways to be thinking. And I guess the analogy would be, when you use the same technology, like if you've ever been to Europe and you travel around Europe, you see that all of the buildings built before 1900, they're all 6 stories high.
Mm-hmm.
Like pretty much 6 stories is the engineering limit of masonry, concrete brick structures with wood framing and the like. And also, it's kind of the human factors limit without an elevator. You can't walk up 12 stories even if you could build a building, but you probably can't structurally build a building and have it not collapse. So you got. By the way, I suspect that in Rome, the tallest buildings were also 6 stories.
Mm-hmm.
So for about 2,000 years, maybe 3,000 years, people were pretty much stuck. And you could endlessly re engineer and attempt to improve things, but the materials are the limiting factor. When steel comes along, now you can reimagine 10-story, 20-story, 40-story buildings, combine steel with, the concept of an elevator or the like with a little bit of electricity. And now the entire world of civil engineering explodes with a
Mm-hmm.
renaissance of creativity. And so materials hold back a given field. The steel was an important material. Oil, if you calculate the energy density of oil and compare it to coal or compare it to wind, right? I went from rowing to sail to coal, steam, powered engines to eventually diesel. But diesel was the big breakthrough,
Mm-hmm.
and it changed all logistics, all maritime engineering, automotive engineering. You put steel together with you put aluminum together with diesel, and you get the airplane. And you take away those two things, right? No internal combustion engine, no oil, and no aluminum, no steel. The civilization disappears. So I've used the metaphor crypto steel, right? Bitcoin really is that crypto steel. It's not just digital energy, it's digital matter, but it's a very particular type of matter. It's a tough enough matter that you could build something that you could reasonably expect to layer. Well, what do I want? I want the building to last 100 years, but I also want it to be 100 stories high.
Mm-hmm.
And 100 stories high is working against gravity, right? And if you think about the energy and gravity on the 100th story versus the first level of the building, you needed some kind of material that had enormous energy density, metallic energy, and steel is the highest density metallic form of energy, or the most powerful metallic energy, manifested as matter. right? But if you ever walked into a steel refinery and you looked at how they created it, there would be no doubt in your mind a lot of energy goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
Extraordinary energy goes into it in order to create that material. So I think if we look forward in the coming age, the human race is held back by lack of certain materials, and when you find the material, then you can leap forward and you can break through all of these constraints. And we have not even scratched the surface. There must be 10,000 different areas that you can reimagine with Bitcoin as the material. We spend a lot of time talking about reimagining nation state currencies, but I mean that's the heaviest lift if you think about it, right?
Mm.
The single thing people fight over the most is probably nation state currency. If we just go back to reimagining a family's balance sheet or a company's balance sheet, or reimagine a store of value asset, and then we start reimagining an insurance policy, and we reimagine maybe a bank, and we reimagine a social network, and we reimagine a firewall. There's a lot of other things we have yet to reimagine. They're a lot less controversial. They're either financial innovation or they're technology innovation of sorts. All of those things are just waiting for the right Bitcoin entrepreneur to go and build that product or that service and that offering and run with it. And I think that it's a very auspicious thing for me. I think there'll be extraordinary opportunities there. And if we're going to make the human race or improve the human condition, I think re-engineering all those things with digital energy is critical, and it's our opportunity. Can I say one more thing, by the
Yeah.
way?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of confusion in the entire crypto community about what I mean when I say digital energy and whether Bitcoin is digital energy. And you just see people trolling me all the time saying, it's not energy, it's not energy, blah, blah, blah. You don't understand. And I don't really want to get in debates on Twitter, right? Because you're not going to change somebody's mind about some deep idea in 280 characters. So
Mm-hmm.
you just go to irritate people. But I think it's worthwhile just for us to focus upon this issue of what does it mean to be digital.
Yeah.
For example, what is digital music? I have a piano, and if I take a Steinway piano and I sit down and I play the piano, I've given you analog music, and that music persists only for a few minutes in time, and then it goes away. And it's very expensive to manufacture that music. I kind of think of that the same way I think of taking a shovel and shoveling as hard as I can, or gearing up on a rowing machine to generate a kilowatt hour of energy. It's a lot of work. I created it and then it disappears. Now there's something called a Steinway stereo piano. I actually could put a stereo unit on my piano, and it's a digitizer, and I can sit down and I can play piano concerto, right, or ragtime, and I put the record on, and it records the song perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Now it becomes a file. It is a digital file. That file can be transferred anywhere in the world. They put it on a network. So now I download that file to a different piano in a different city, and I punch a button, and it runs the file back into the piano. It pulls some electricity out of the wall, right? And it decodes the file, and then the electricity fires up some actuators. The actuators strike the keys, and the song plays itself.
Mm-hmm.
I can play the song 1,000 times. I can play the song 5 years after it was recorded. I can play it. I can play songs that were recorded by someone in the 1920s on my piano today. It's digital music. The file is the digital music. If I don't have a stereo piano to play it on, you might say, well, then it's not digital music, but the file is still digital music. If I'm deaf and I can't hear it, is it still digital music? The answer is, yeah, it's digital music. I can deliver you millions and millions of songs to any of those, to that device, anytime, any place, maybe 1,000 years from now. 1,000 years from now, you'll listen to a great piano player play Rachmaninoff on that piano. So if I wish to transcend time and space, I digitally transform the music from analog to digital. And then when I want to listen to it again and enjoy it, I transform it back from digital back to analog. I reverse the transaction, and it involves some machines, some electricity, some computer chips on either side. Now let's take energy. I run a nuclear power plant. I generate $1 billion worth of energy. I can pump it into the grid. It'll be gone in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 years from now, it's gone. I generated in the year 2022. In the year 3022, it's gone. That's analog energy. That is electricity. If I take the $1 billion of electricity and instead I sell it for $1 billion of political energy, we call dollars, then I trade the political energy for digital energy, we call Bitcoin, and I have $1 billion of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is a file. I have transformed analog energy into digital energy. Now, when I move the file from me to you, I lose it, you have it. And the difference between that file and a digital music file is the music is not conservative and the Bitcoin is conservative. And so when I sent you the music file, I kept a copy. But when I send you the Bitcoin, there's no double spend. I lost the copy. So when I transfer the $1 billion file, in this case, the keys, it could just be transferring the keys, and there's a lot of ways we can do it. But at the end of the day, I can create a file with the private keys, and I can move them at the speed of light. I can move them 1,000,000 times a second, right, on a layer 3 if I want to. I can slice them, multiplex them, oscillate them, vibrate them. However, and I can store them for 1,000 years or 100 years or 10 years or 1 year. And I can send it to Tokyo. And when you receive the file in Tokyo, you want the electricity back. You convert the Bitcoin into yen, the yen into electricity, and now you've got $1 billion worth of electricity in Tokyo with no energy loss. Right now, the loss would be maybe a few basis points in the trade, depending upon the state of the exchanges. And if they're inexpensive exchanges, okay, well, maybe you lose 50 basis points or 100 basis points. Call that friction. You lose 600 basis points just to move the electricity down a power line a few miles. So 600 basis points is the transaction fee right now. You can get to 60, probably 30. Last I checked, the transaction fee on the Bitcoin network was 1 basis point. You were literally paying 1/100% of the value transferred as transaction fee. And that was pretty extraordinary to me. So when I think of and refer to Bitcoin as digital energy, what I mean is you can literally transform any form of energy, and people need to think more broadly. Oil is energy, natural gas is energy, electricity is energy, money is energy, euros, yen, won are energy, food is energy, work is energy, water in a dam upstream is energy. They're all energy. And you transform them into different types of energy. Eventually, you'll probably flip through a political energy we call fiat currency, and then you'll convert that. These are heat exchanges or energy exchanges, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just transforming one type of energy to another. What is vibration? Vibration literally is the transformation of energy from one form to another form, right? Like pendulum, this is potential energy, this is kinetic energy.
Yeah.
Potential kinetic. It's continually with a sine wave vibrating, just like that guitar is vibrating. Potential energy to kinetic energy. when you're vibrating energy between the dollar and the Bitcoin and back to the dollar and into electricity and back to the Bitcoin, you're just vibrating it, and you've got a little bit of energy loss, but not that much. And if there's not very much energy loss, you get a resonating frequency. You strike something and it'll actually hum, right, forever, right, a long, long time. And what's an example of something that's resonating for a long time? A laser beam through space go for a long time,
Mm.
long way. So once you start to understand that idea, right, that a file with the keys to Bitcoin is digital energy, just like a file with a song on it is musical energy, just like a file with a map on it is digital music, and a file with a map on it is just digital information or a digital map. They're all just digital transformations. And the reason you transform them digitally is so that you can vibrate them at any frequency and store them with no degradation, right? Move them in a friction free programmatic fashion, and store them forever. And I, I can't store my oil or my electricity forever. And I can't program it, decompose it, recompose it, and oscillate or vibrate it. And that's why I want it digital. But as soon as you break that idea and you realize that once you've digitally transformed it, then the sky's the limit, because at that point you can write programs and machines that do 10 million things an hour with it. You can decompose it and vibrate it, in different forms between 100,000 counterparties in an hour. I mean, who knows where that leads? One very useful application we've talked about is just if you simply implement this as a form of cybersecurity to post a security deposit as you transfer through cyberspace or move through cyberspace, the average person will click through hundreds of web pages a day. So if you're actually posting and retrieving your deposit hundreds of times a day, that's a much higher frequency transaction than any purchase in get transactions you ever go through. And you couldn't do it if you didn't have efficiency, because if you lost 1% of your money every time
Mm-hmm.
you went from site to site, you would have no money left after an hour. And so you can see the skin gets flayed off your body because there's just so much friction. So when I eliminate that, I, I think the right metaphor is like, what if I invented something uh, that you could, what if I had a machine, you could hold it in your hand, you point at anything and it made it weightless? Like a levitator. What if I could make your car weightless? What if you could make anything weightless? A building, a ship, a plane, a tree, anything. Click, it's weightless. Now, think about the implications for logistics and construction and the like. It's like if you can make it weightless, or you can put it in orbit, then you can reimagine the entire civilization. And when we convert physical energy and physical matter to digital energy and digital matter, in cyberspace, it's weightless. And you can play with the concept of time and frequency and scale, right? Something in orbit will orbit forever, right? It's like the difference between getting into orbit and getting almost into orbit is almost into orbit is you burn up in a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds. Into orbit, and you orbit forever, right, to the end of time, or at least until something else slams into you. And so digital energy is about putting energy into orbit. It's about putting something real into cyberspace. And the profound idea is if you can create digital energy, you can create digital matter. If you can create digital matter, you can create something that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And now the passage of time and the onset of entropy allows you to construct something in the digital realm which is orders of magnitude better than what we have today.
I think that was a really good framing, particularly the music analogy. I just want to clarify one point is that in the process of all of this transformation, particularly the ability to, so when you say click, make something weightless, that's the process of digitization that you're describing there, right? Is like taking
Yeah.
something and digitizing it. The keystone idea behind all of this, though, is what you mentioned about conservatism, right? Is you can't just do that and assume no cost, right? There has to be like if you click make something weightless and then it
The point
escapes the system,
the
then
point
you're
of
actually fucked up.
weightless is the point is I want to move $1 billion of electricity from here to Tokyo for free.
Hmm.
You see, that's impossible to move that thing without digitizing it. You can't get it there, right? So if I said to you, I want you to move that car, right? Pick it up and move it. You can't pick it up and move. I have to make it weightless. I didn't eliminate the mass of the car. I just made it possible for you to move the car from point A to point B by making it weightless. That's what I mean by that.
Hmm.
When you digitally transform, so you didn't lose the mass or the energy, you gained the ability to move it a million times a second. You see, anywhere. Like maybe the better metaphor is teleport.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, so, people have used that before. What if you could? Was it either Hal Finney or Satoshi or somebody said, "What if you could teleport this thing?" Right. So it's uh, it's kind of critical to think of this because when you start to embrace the idea of digitally transforming energy, the big idea is not the digital transformation because we digitally transformed everything else
Everything else, yeah.
non-conservative.
Yep.
The big idea is that energy is matter and money is energy. And so the big idea is we have created digital matter, digital money, digital energy. The big idea is that money at low frequency is currency, and money at high frequency, say
So,
money at mid frequency is currency. Money at low frequency is property.
hmm.
Money at high frequency is just pure energy. And so the big idea is you can create digital currency, digital property, digital money, digital energy, digital matter. And that means you can create digital machines. Maybe you can create digital walls, digital fortresses, also all sorts of you can probably create digital life, right?
Mm.
You know, I mean, Satoshi opens, this portal into the digital realm. Energy flows through. Without energy, there's not real life. There's just the shadow of life.
Hmm.
Like for example, what if I want to create something that's a living AI that's independent and has sovereignty? I could never do it before Bitcoin because ultimately you've got a counterparty that controls the money that's outside of cyberspace.
Yeah.
It's like, how does a machine get a credit card from a bank? Right? Because it's political. The subtlety here is we've just moved matter and energy and money out of the political domain and we moved it into the cyber domain or allowed you to at least create a small colony with digital energy and digital matter in cyberspace that can grow over time. And you could think of Bitcoin is we open that hole and through that hole comes 400 $500 billion worth of energy. We're not quite sure exactly how much energy there is because there's so much volatility, but it's sometimes when a fire is just getting going, it's not quite clear how much
Yeah.
energy is in that fire
The
either.
sparks are flying. Yeah.
It's sparking and it's very volatile and you don't have measurement instruments and it's so dynamic and changing so rapidly it's not clear. But once you've actually established the fact that the information itself is the energy, then a program that controls the information controls the energy, and now you've created some reflexivity. Like in theory, now that artificial intelligence creature has the money, the energy to reach out in the real world and manifest itself as a product or a service, right? As opposed to the opposite direction, autonomously. Like, what'll happen? I don't know, but the obvious application would be like some kind of trust application. If I wanted to create an endowment that would do things in perpetuity over on like time locked contracts,
Mm.
time locked contracts are interesting for a few minutes or a few days, but they get really interesting when they're for, every 5 years or every 10 years or every 20 years, right? Or something like that. You want something to go on in perpetuity where and what's our problem? Our problem is the counterparty risk, right?
Yeah, I
I want to hold my goal for 100 years. What bank can I trust for 100 years not to seize it? And the answer is no, none. You have to move it every 10 years. So if I can find a way to instantiate something of serious value without a counterparty, right, opens up a whole new world.
this one makes me think about inheritance for my kids, like long term. I want to create a system whereby they have to uh, go through particular rites of passage to earn and unlock elements of their Bitcoin, and it that's
Yeah,
a
I
really
was thinking the same thing, really. It's like if you wanted to have something that's
yeah.
virtuous and programmatic, and you wanted to create it such that it would be there even if you're not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like ultimately, if you have enough money, then maybe you can afford to hire a lawyer, but the lawyer dies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what person could you hire today that you could trust in 30 years? Okay, so then you hire a firm, right? Which firm can you trust in 30 years? Now you're back to this issue of who can you trust?
Yeah.
And will they be corrupted or captured by a nation state? Can you count on that foundation to fulfill your wishes after you're gone? Tricky. The computer program, though, like I fully expect, Bitcoin will be doing its Bitcoin thing in the year 2140 when it stops issuing coins to miners, and I don't know why it wouldn't be doing the same thing and affecting the protocol in 2240 and 2340 and 2440. So I think that there are interesting things to be built on top of it, but they're much better built on top of like a Lightning protocol where Bitcoin is the gas.
Yeah. I mean, even there's one thing that this reminds me of is like Bitcoin's this kind of long-term phenomenon that has entered a world uh, kind of trapped in short-termism, and it's such a juxtaposition, I guess, in that sense. But I wanted to ask you something about life and entropy. I've been toying with this idea for a little bit. I wrote some notes here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. So you on the pod with Lex, you described humans as engineers, and I agree with you. I think our in our DNA seems to be this predisposition towards transforming something chaotic into something of a greater order, and it's just I don't know what we do since we picked up the first rock and threw it at an animal to save some time and energy in acquiring some food. We seem to behave in this direction. So I've tried to think about life as this anti-entropic force in a sense. It's like everything else seems to be seems to operate with like entropy. Entropy seems to go the opposite way, but life seems to be this one thing that bucks entropy. And
Yeah, Engineering is the process of creating order around you by pushing the entropy or the disorder elsewhere.
Elsewhere, okay.
Right. Right. So when I create a bridge, I create order, around the bridge. But of course, all the work done and the energy expended creates disorder elsewhere.
Hmm.
And I think that's a description of life, right? We,
Hmm.
we are creating order around us by putting disorder elsewhere. And there's a lot of places to put it, right? So just put it away from you. Maybe we bury it, like maybe we burn it. So, I mean, that is engineering, and that's life in general. And humans are the best engineers, so we're doing the most of that.
It's why we're the apex species, right? It's like we've. Did you ever read Brandon Quittem's piece about Bitcoin, the pioneer species?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's I
yeah,
think it's
that's good.
yeah, it
It's
was
good.
a fantastic piece, and the concept of carrying capacity comes to mind now. Is that uh, life seems to want to increase its carrying capacity, take more energy, create more order, um, and carve out a space for itself. Um, I I guess that's why I
Yeah,
hate. Go ahead.
I think Brandon's great, and he writes really great stuff, and he's brilliant. And I've liked everything he's written. I think that Darwinian process is squeezing the inefficient creatures and the inefficient designs
Out.
out,
Yeah.
right? And like, if there's three species in the same ecosystem, and one of them is able to capture food 3 times as fast as the other two, then the one pushes out the other one, right? I mean, all other things being equal. So all of this evolution is experimentation, mutation, and ordering, and the most efficient processes, the most efficient species succeed. And it's like, I mean, I looked over the other day. I saw a blue heron, and the blue heron is sitting in a creek behind my house. And I thought to myself, and the heron's fishing, and it's always there.
Hmm.
But how do you think I know there's fish in the creek? Because the heron wouldn't sit there and fish for 4 days in a row if it didn't get any fish, right?
Hmm.
Right after about a week, it would either be, if it's stupid, it would be dead, and if it's smart, it would leave. But one way or the other, the problem's getting sorted out, right? If the bird is not smart enough to figure out how to fish and not smart enough to figure out where to go fish, then there's no bird. And so nature just has a way of spontaneously ordering things continually, and there's this competition, and human beings are the biggest, actors in that ecosystem. But there are variables. For example, you've got the example of Easter Island, where the human beings there ended up with an inefficient political system, and they chopped down all their trees and starved themselves. Right? They were irrational. So so that's an example of Darwinian selection working in one way, right? And you know there's hard money societies that have functioning economies, and there's loose money societies, and they collapse the currency. And when they collapse the currency, all their companies fail, and then all their political constructs fail, right? And then they generally, you know, get taken over by somebody else if there's anything desirable there, and exploited, right? If they got raw materials, they get exploited by a better organized society or civilization. And if they don't have raw materials, they just get left to their squalor. And Bitcoin is an example of good technology, but you could say good technology is anti-entropic. Or there are more efficient ways or less efficient ways to do things,
Hmm.
right? It's kind of simple. Like, try to move stuff around with a wheel and without a wheel, right? You've got human beings in both cases. Um, I use this example with breedlove. If you go to the American History Museum, you can find that the Native Americans, they invented the wheel, but they only used it as a pottery wheel.
Yeah,
They turned it and
yeah,
they just spun pottery with it,
I remember this.
and it never occurred to them to turn it the other way and use it as a wagon wheel. And of course the Europeans kind of figured it out. There's no record of the Native Americans ever figuring it out, and so eventually the Europeans show up with the ships and the guns and the germs and everything else, and one society displaces the other one. I don't know if it's just not inventing the wheel that held them back, but it certainly didn't help them any. If you
Yeah.
don't invent the wheel, there are a lot of other things you probably don't figure out.
Speaking of that conversation with Breedlove, I think on that segment of discussions, you mentioned something which really clicked for me that I've thought of. In fact, kind of write about it in this book. Is that nature and all functional complex systems are adaptive control systems. They error correct, and I mean something that's alive error corrects, and this is, I think, one of the really mind-blowing things about Bitcoin is that uh, you know it adapts, and like it's in Bitcoin's DNA to adapt, and it doesn't require some sort of central manager to do that. It kind of does it itself, which is very much, I think, the definition of like nature or capitalism even is you know they seem to be, yeah, as you said, like a error correcting adaptive system.
Yeah, you could definitely characterize it as a virus, and you could characterize it as something more sophisticated than a virus too,
Mm.
depending upon your sentiments. But it definitely does. It does have the elements of a life form that is evolving, and as you attach other applications to it, right? The miners are an instantiation of Bitcoin, and
Hmm.
and they move almost like specialized cells, right? And Bitcoin hodlers are another form of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin exchanges are another form, and then Bitcoin applications are another form, and as you build layers of applications on top, right? They're all life forms, different cells, different organisms, and they're living and they're dying, they're coming and they're going all the time, right?
And it
And
becomes more
that's
complex.
so that's it, it is one of the great viral technologies, truly viral. And you could characterize it and think of it as life in cyberspace. It is cyber life. It's like all these creatures, right? You've got a relationship with a Bitcoin miner in a country you've never been to that you'll never meet, and yet they're part of the system. Sometimes I think of Bitcoin miners as the skin, just like your skin is part of your immune system.
Mm.
It's like if you scrape some off, it hurts bad, but it's the first line of defense.
Hmm.
So a Bitcoin miner will get attacked by this nation state, or they'll get their electricity jacked up by that one. That's not unlike you putting your hand on a hot stove.
Hmm.
The power company doubled the cost of my electricity. It's like, oh, I touched a hot stove, it hurt.
Hmm.
What are you going to do next? You're going to go find a power company you can trust. Well, I was minding my own business, and an earthquake hit, and the skillet fell off the stove and burned me. Well, it's just accident, nothing you could do about it.
Yeah.
What's the solution? Well, the human race has got more than one person in the kitchen at any given time. So
Hmm. Hmm.
hopefully not all of us, get hit by the earthquake in the same place. We're decentralized and life goes on.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last question because we're kind of nearing the end of this part. Is I don't know. I've got two here. Maybe we can hit both. One of them is this idea of paradigm shift because Bitcoin is such a profound paradigm shift, and it touches so many different kind of areas. Um, there's a guy called what's his name, Bronze Age pervert or whatever, and he argues that the greatest civilizational changes occur as a result of the changes in weaponry, which is kind of similar to the whole sovereign individual position on the returns to violence, and I think that's partly true, and then the other part that is true is this unlocking of new materials or energy, whether it's oil, steam, steel, etc., as we've mentioned. But we've got this thing, however we're gonna frame it or call it, perfect money, fucking digital energy, whatever we're gonna call it. Why do you think people like? I'm thinking Dalio, for example. Ray Dalio is like, they talk about paradigm shifts, but they completely like miss this very clear paradigm shift that's staring
Yeah.
them in the face. What do you think that?
Well, first of all,
Why?
I think it absolutely is a paradigm shift, and a lot of times people get lazy because they study paradigm shifts, but they study ones that have already happened before they lived, and they think
Okay,
that
thank you.
they would never fall for that. Uh, it's like, but you're looking backwards,
Best
right?
answer.
So they're like, it's because I'm looking backwards, and I'm like, well, I understand that Einstein didn't get quantum physics, but I do, or I understand steel, or I understand airplanes, but they've got hindsight, and so they overestimate their grasp of the idea. But the real point of a paradigm shift is it's so profound you didn't expect,
Mm-hmm.
like the Earth is not the center of the universe, right? It's like so profound that you didn't know to ask the question.
Yeah.
And if you if you look at this, right, it's a paradigm shift for economists because they didn't really think about what money is, right?
Yeah.
You can make a reasonable argument that 95% of economists don't know what money is. They study their entire life, they just don't know what it is. They never think of it as energy or economic energy, and they don't think that physics or thermodynamics apply, and so they're not expecting it to be that, and they don't think they're a hard science. I'm not a hard science, therefore I didn't, why did I do this? I didn't want to study physics or math or whatever. And so politicians the same way, right? Uh, I, I didn't want it to be that. And so I studied something different. And so I'm not looking for it to be that. Um, a lot of times people, the way it's a paradigm shift, by the way, is I would say 75% of the people in the crypto community don't understand the concept of digital energy. Like
I think you're
all
being
the crypto
generous. Go ahead.
the crypto people that have been in it for a decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
They look at that and they immediately reflexively say, "Well, it isn't because I understand energy."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, though, if you're really open-minded and somebody says something that you don't agree with, and it's a paradigm shift, you would have to stop and then think really hard for hours and hours. And then you start by saying, well, maybe they're right. How would they be right? And you have to flip instead of reflexively saying they're wrong. And the reason people are reflexive is they've already decided what it is. Like the problem with cryptocurrency is everybody decided, and the problem with just being totally passionate about currency is you're in this political mindset where you've decided that this technology is a replacement for the dollar or a replacement for the yen or the euro, and then you're in that train, and it becomes a political economic thing for you, and then you're not going to stop and say, well, what's aeronautical engineering got to do with this? Just because that's just not right. What's civil engineering got to do with this? you know what's music got to do with this? Because music and spaceship design and buildings and dams, those don't have anything to do with currency. You've decided what currency is, and so you want to drill into that. So I think that what you have is you've got one group of people, the economists, and they've never embraced engineering. So the idea that money is energy and you could engineer a better system, that's foreign to them because they've always taken comfort from the fact that economics is not engineering and it's not a hard science. They took comfort from it. And then I think that the guys like the Dalios of the world, a lot of the investors, I don't know. I mean, Dalio's almost getting to the conclusion, but Dalio's not a technologist, so
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't really think of it as technology. He can't bring himself to think of an asset as technology. He's okay with macro. He can think macro, but if you think about technology and you know what happened with Google and Apple, and you know Google and Apple crushed everybody because of that network effect and because of that protocol stack, and you saw what happened to everybody else in the system, then you start to see in terms of exponential viral winner take all behavior that goes super fast when you've got a technology metaphor. A lot of people, a lot of investors are not macro investors. And so they think, let's take Buffett and Munger. They actually think investment consists of picking companies. Like
Mm.
their entire frame of reference is a universe that consists of 10,000 publicly traded companies or private companies, and you have to choose which company you're going to own. And of course, that's like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. If I said pick which deck chair you want to own on the Titanic, and you said, well, the Titanic's sinking, we're all going to die. There isn't
Mm.
any deck chair I want to own. But if you lived on a cruise ship where the only thing you could invest in was deck chairs and the ship had never sunk, right? Then you're entrained in that.
That's their
And
paradigm.
that's their paradigm is they think the ship will never sink. Like that, the reason I use the example of Argentina often is because it's a very obvious example of how no portfolio allocation will work. No mixture of bonds and stocks or conventional assets will work because everything is correlated to the currency, which is going to zero. And it's when you're on a platform that's going to zero and everything is on that platform and correlated, then all of your thinking is conventional and it's all losing. So the 60-40 bond portfolio doesn't work, and picking stocks doesn't work, and Ben Graham value investing, it doesn't work in the Weimar Republic, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work when the currency goes to zero. No stock analysis works. So then you have to be a macro thinker. So yeah, you can sort of be a macro thinker, but one set of people that miss the paradigm are people that never saw a macroeconomic meltdown of the entire currency. Another set, they've never seen an asset that was also technology. So if you and the third set, they're not engineers. They're like the big blind spot in crypto, in my opinion, Alex, is there are too many computer scientists and not enough physicists and engineers. So most of the early crypto, the first decade, all these, all the proof of stake networks and all the DeFi and all these, perpetual motion machines and cute gadgets people come up with. They all thought that they were improving on Satoshi's engineering, but what they didn't realize is Satoshi was the better engineer.
Yeah.
Satoshi was a full featured engineer that knew software engineering, cryptography, but also systems engineering, material engineering, et cetera. And so most of the people that I see that dominate in the rest of the crypto ecosystem, they have very weak or no backgrounds in aeronautical engineering or systems engineering or civil engineering or ocean engineering, or physics, any of those areas. And then they don't have a lot of real life experience, right? Most of them are in their 20s and their 30s. And so they've never actually built anything and failed at anything. If I want to fix your ego, I just put you in charge. Okay, you think you can do it better here, you run the thing for a year. Okay, and you would come back and go, well, it's actually a lot harder than I thought it
Mm-hmm.
would be. Everybody doesn't just do what I tell them to do. I thought I could just tell them what to do, and then they did it and everything broke, or they all quit, and now it all broke. And so if you actually And by the way, the competitor turned out to be 100 times smarter than I thought they were, and then they kept investing and they wouldn't stop investing, and nobody takes vacations that's competing against me. So I think that when you add real world experience, like do something for 30 years, and then you layer on engineering, which is it's really the discipline of constructing machines that work. And then you layer on some physics and thermodynamics in the real world where there's friction and gravity and speed of light and speed of sound and the Reynolds number, right? Things that, Hall speeds, things that there's a point at which no amount of effort will get you any further, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The harder you push, the harder the world pushes back at you. And in computer science, they never get to that point. But in the real world, if you've ever tried to do anything in real business, or if you try to row a boat, or you try to design an airplane, there's a reason we fly below the speed of sound. It's because nature pushes back exponentially hard. And when you realize that, like Adam Back realized that, he points out that the design parameters for Bitcoin are pretty narrow, and he tried to improve on the design and he couldn't.
Yeah.
Like blocks every 10 minutes, the 1 meg block size. All of these like would-be technologists keep talking about improving it, and it never occurs to them that you change the block size, it's like changing the speed of sound or the gravitation constant in the universe. You're playing God, and if you actually change the gravitational constant, you break everything.
Yeah.
If you change the speed of sound, you break everything. Every creature on Earth doesn't work right. You kill everything. And so the fact is, don't screw with it. It works fine. The problem is you, not the system. And engineers learn this, right? Because it's humbling when you're an engineer. There's an ideal hull shape, and someone figured it out 100 years ago, and you can just tweak it plus or minus 2%, but you're not going to get some profound 10x breakthrough.
This reminds me of the part of the conversation earlier where we talked about innovation in bits versus atoms. Bitcoin kind of brings a rigor of the innovation that has happened in atoms, where you actually have to contend with limitations and consequences, and as you said, the world pushing back, and bringing that sort of engineering prowess into the digital realm is a whole different level of operation versus the classic Silicon Valley just play with the computer. And
the other observation, Alex, about paradigm shift is as long as people think Bitcoin is money or a financial asset, then you've got a world full of people in the finance industry, and they make a living going through a set of very inefficient motions that are no longer necessary or relevant. And so it's very difficult for people to think themselves out of a job, right? It's against human nature, right? So if you make a lot of money by doing something which has just been digitally transformed away, then it's not in your best interest to figure it out. And everybody generally has a set of natural biases. So it's easier for an outsider with no vested interest, no skin in the game, to walk in, because they're not looking at deconstructing their life's work. That's why, oftentimes, it's an outsider like Tesla that walks into the auto industry, or if you're an architect and you've made your name by creating masonry structures for 30 years, and then steel comes along, your first reaction is, that's ugly, it'll be dangerous, it's probably going to kill somebody. Yeah, it's very easy to come up with a lot of reasons to dismiss it, and it's aligned with your economic interest, and it's also aligned with your information set. And if it takes you 100 hours to figure out that you can do a new type of building, and then if you're going to have to go through a decade of risk and uncertainty if you enter into that business, it's pretty difficult for the incumbents. So most of the incumbents that reject this, they have a vested interest and an economic interest in not embracing it, and and they'll be just fine if they don't. So it's people on the margin that have the need and the wherewithal to get in, that they will make the difference. And that's a bit of a random process to figure out who that is, and then the process has got to exponentially grow.
Mm.
It is truly a profound paradigm shift, though, because even the people in technology, big tech, they don't understand money, right? So the idea of digital energy, that's a threatening, or just a bizarre, wacky idea to anybody at Apple or Google or Facebook. And it's a wacky idea to somebody in finance, and it's a wacky idea to someone in the energy industry, and it's a wacky idea to someone in politics, right? And so because it's a wacky idea to everybody, right, the easiest thing for them to do is just
Dismiss
dismiss
it.
the idea, because their life is a lot easier if they dismiss the idea, and they don't have to take any risk, and they don't have to risk looking stupid. And so that will remain. The way that you will break that cycle is you will build machines based on that wacky idea that work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can build those machines, and those machines are commercially successful, like lightning wall, lightning services, new types of software, and or you build a company, right? And as you have financial success or market success, then people will grudgingly take a second look, and then they'll take a third look, and at some point, you'll start to get the next cohort of adopters, right? You'll go from the early adopters to the followers, and they'll wait, and then 20 years, 30 years afterwards, people will be like, oh yeah, of course.
It was inevitable. Yeah, it was obvious, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that with like Kodak and Instagram, right? At the end of the day, like, who made all the money from digital photos? Really? It's like not who anybody expected, and there's a lot of kicking and screaming along the way, a lot of reasons why.
Indeed. Um, Mike, there's I could talk to you for days. There's a million other things I wanted to ask you, but we've to be respectful of your time, I want to thank you for carving out 4 hours, man, to talk through this stuff. Like, I wanted to talk about the age of meritocracy. I want to talk about the great filter. We can do those on some future episode.
Maybe the next time.
Yeah. Is there anything final or closing that you might want to say um, about Bitcoin, about our discussion, about energy,
I
anything?
What I would say is, the world is going through an unprecedented financial crisis, the greatest of our lifetime. And the financial world is in crisis, and the political world is in the greatest turmoil I can remember in a long time. There's just a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of sound and fury, a lot of strong passion, a lot of noise, a lot of turbulence. Bitcoin is a good thing. Everyone that's listening to this podcast almost certainly believes in it, is excited about it, sees it as the future. There's 1,000 things in the world that people are engaged in conversations on, but most of the world doesn't fully appreciate the potential that Bitcoin has as a technology, either as a better money, or as a digital energy, or as a better property, or as a source of, as a better ideology, or whatever, as a catalyst for good. Most people don't recognize that. So you have finite minutes in your life left. There, when you meet a person, you only have a few minutes to talk with them to convey something. Think about how you use your time, and ask yourself, what's the best good that you can bring with that time? What's the highest form of good you can accomplish? I generally of the opinion that constructively cheerfully educating people, removing dealing with the fear, dealing with the doubt, dealing with the uncertainty, educating them that Bitcoin is a great technology, the greatest monetary technology in the history of the world, can improve their lives, their friends' lives, their companies' lives, the lives of their citizens in their country. It can improve everything it touches if they grasp and understand it. I think that's the highest best use of time and energy. And it's always a temptation to get drawn into other discussions and other debates. Like, I'm not telling you how to spend your personal time with your friends and family. You do what you want, but in terms of professional focus, the focus is to educate the world on how everybody can improve their lot. And when you do that, you have to do it in a language they speak. You have to use the metaphors they understand. You have to appeal to the values they have. Sometimes you might not even share those values, right? But figure out what they want, how they speak, how they communicate, how they want to be communicated to, right? And then communicate to them as much insight about a perspective about Bitcoin as you can. That's how we spread the entire network. That's how we improve the world. And just avoid getting baited and distracted and drawn into negativity, right? People want to poke you. You see in my interviews, like, they want to poke me, blah blah blah. You lost some money. So 100 years from now, no one's going to care whether you made or lost money in Bitcoin mark to market in Q2 of 2022.
Yeah.
It's not going to matter. Big picture, right? Lots of things happening. Don't get baited, right? If you get defensive, if you get drawn into ad hominem discussions, that's a challenge. If you start to think that somebody is, some big organization is against Bitcoin, they don't care. I mean, like you could say, oh yeah, they're out to get me. They're out to get me. They're out to get me. You know, if I look at all these organizations, right, they have a million other things they're worried about. They're taking sometimes the path of least resistance. This is just new technology they don't understand. People always react to new technology with, I'll look at it later. Don't bother me. I don't know if I need it. I'll do it this way for now. Until they have a compelling requirement, they're going to tend to be dismissive. And when someone is dismissive, you just want to be cheerful, enthusiastic, creative. Figure out a creative way to tell them how it solves their problem. Right? You're a salesperson. Right? We're all pretty much salespeople. Salesperson shows up. What do you have? I have the best money ever in history of the world. Why do I need that? Well, okay, here's the other point, which is, hopefully when you meet them, you should listen, or you should have already done your research to figure out why they might need it.
Yeah.
Every single meeting I have in my entire life, I always look at the company. What's the company? What's the person? What's their background? What's their ideology? Why would they benefit from what I have to offer? And then I do my best to explain the benefit to them, in the most concise format I can. And you either make the sale or you don't make the sale. If you make the sale, great. Then that's the beginning of a relationship. If you don't make the sale, thank them for their time. Don't make them angry, right? I mean, you don't want them to say, oh, some Bitcoiner came and tried to persuade me and then called me an idiot for not getting it, right? Then they just, there's no point. That your company is not going to benefit from a salesperson that gets angry at the prospect that doesn't buy on the first sales call. So I think if we think like that, you'll make a lot of friends. You won't make any enemies. You'll do a lot of good. You'll learn a lot. I learn a lot more when I listen to the person I'm talking with. Right? What do they think? And then we just go back and polish, our content, react to what we're learning, and it's to your point, adaptive, right? adaptive, and try to avoid try to avoid creating unnecessary difficulty for yourself, because there are certain people and they manage to get in a fight with everybody about everything all the time. I think
I'm
it's
close to
like
one of those.
your life is too short. It's going to pass you by, right? So if I'm keeping a scorecard, right, the scorecard is, you know, who did you convince that they should join the network? And the way you join the network is you convert your money from a different asset into Bitcoin. That's the joining of the network, right? The more energy you attract in the network, then the faster the world's going to get better. So ultimately, that's the ultimate utility function.
Mike, appreciate you capping it off, and wise words. Something I need to think about because I guess I'm one of those people who's still quite hot blooded and very prone to be uh, baited, to use your terminology. But yeah, this has been a great discussion. So yeah, once again, really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope we can do this again to kind of go into some of the other things. I really think this idea of trying to imagine what Bitcoin means for civilization long term, which is why I wrote that great filter piece, trying to think of this notion of a timeline of before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin being like a real way that will measure civilization in the future. Like I don't know if there has been something as important as this. But yeah, I'd love to dig down that rabbit hole at some stage in the future. And thank you for all the work you're doing, everything that you're doing at MicroStrategy, and yeah, just putting so much time into helping people understand what the hell this thing is.
My pleasure.
Thank
It's
you,
great
man.
to spend time with you. Keep up the good
Absolutely.
work,
Thank
and
you, man.
I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Take care, man.